Good evening. I want to thank you all for attending tonight's meeting. Each season, South King County is faced with potential emergencies due to weather changes, natural disasters, and other emergencies. The threat of these emergencies is particularly elevated in the winter and spring seasons. This community conversation about flood and emergency preparedness is an opportunity to bring us together to address the needs of our neighbors, to help us be prepared when disaster strikes. To this end, we need to know the answers to the following questions. Who do we call? What happens when? What do I need in my business and home to be prepared? Tonight is an opportunity to get answers and be aware of the resources before a disaster strikes. Here's an opportunity to hear from some of the very best in our community, in our region, to talk about how we can be prepared. We have a number of speakers here tonight, and I'd like to begin by recognizing, I know there are some elected officials in the audience. Could those who are elected officials in the audience raise your hand, please? Could you identify yourself? From Black Diamond. Yes, sir. Okay, very good. That's good enough. I thought I saw one of the Auburn City Council. Yes, sir. Can you identify yourself, sir?
Sheriff, my name is Bill Pelosa. I live on the Green River. Enough said.
We all pray for you. We have Commissioner.
I'm Bill Gates, Fire Commissioner with South King Fire and Rescue.
Yes, sir.
Bill Fuller, Commissioner of South King Fire and Rescue.
Any other elected officials? I want to make sure. Yes, sir. Back here.
Bill Fortunato, State Senator, 31st District.
Thank you. Any other elected officials? I want to thank you all for being here. And I also want to recognize our folks from the King County Sheriff's Office. Can you identify yourself, sir?
Hi, I'm Deputy Todd with the Sheriff's Office. I generally patrol this area out here.
Let's give him a round of applause. At this time, I'd like to introduce our panel. And in the introduction, we'll start with each one perhaps giving an outline about their role in flood and emergency preparedness. And then we'll get into points of issue. But we'll begin with Michelle Clark from the Flood District.
Hi, thank you, Councilmember. Before I even start, I want to thank you guys for coming out when we should all probably be watching the Mariners game. Yes. So thank you for that. My name is Michelle Clark. I'm the Executive Director of the King County Flood Control District, and I run a small special purpose government whose sole mission is to protect people and property in King County from the effects of flood damage. So I build levees and revetments and lift houses and those sorts of things to try to keep people out of the way of flood water.
Barnaby?
Thank you. My name is Barnaby Dow. I'm Government Relations Manager for King County Emergency Management. When a disaster is declared in Washington State, it's declared by county. So the effort will flow through the county's 2 local communities, and we'd be that controlling agency. Floods are the #1 threat in King County. We've had more than a dozen declared flood-related disasters in King County in the past 10 years. The thing that keeps us up at night, every night, however, is, of course, earthquake, which you've all been reading about, and why we're all so glad to hear you come out tonight and see you in the audience. So we'll talk more about that as we go along. But we're a pretty small shop of about 20 people, and we don't have black helicopters or ambulances or anything like that, but we do know everybody who does, and we get in touch with them in order to marshal resources on behalf of the people of the county. And we'll be talking more about that.
Chris?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Utzinger. I'm the Response Section Manager with the Washington Military Department's Emergency Management Division. We are a second-level support in emergencies. All emergencies basically start at the local level and may scale up to the state level and ultimately in large disasters to the federal level, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Our vision in the Emergency Management Division is to have a disaster-ready and resilient Washington State, and we consider it to be our mission in the Emergency Management Division to coordinate mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery efforts in the state to minimize the potential impact of any disasters and emergencies on the people, the property, and the environment, as well as the economy of our state. And on the next slide, you basically just see our day-to-day organization. So we have 3 different units in our organization: a preparedness unit, a mitigation response and recovery unit, of which I am a part, and then we have an E911 unit that takes care of the E911 network in the state. As the response section manager, on the next slide, you'll see my responsibility is for operating the State Emergency Operations Center. And that State Emergency Operations Center is basically a 24-hour operation. We are always activated at one level or another. Our lowest activation level, which we are at right now, is the level 3, or monitoring, and what that means is that we have around the clock 2 duty officers or watch officers that are keeping tabs on what is going on around the state and responding to numerous incidents with standard operating procedures. They handle alert, warning, and resource coordination for upward of 5,000 incidents annually. The most frequent incident that they deal with here in the state of Washington are hazardous material spills. We will have anywhere between 2,400 and 2,600 hazardous material spills a year that are reported to our alert and warning center, and then we will, depending on where the spills are, notify response agencies, be it spill response from the Department of Ecology or the Coast Guard if it's on a waterway. If any emergency exceeds the capacity of what the Alert and Warning Center can handle, then we will raise the activation level of the state EOC to a level 2, which is a partial activation, or a level 1, which is a full activation. The bottom picture on this slide basically shows you a briefing during a full activation of the state EOC. This picture was actually taken during a 4-day exercise conducted in 2016, our Cascadia Rising exercise, where we were simulating aspects of a catastrophic incident. On the next slide, you can basically see that our organizational structure changes once we partially or fully activate the EOC. Like first responders and county EOCs, we follow the incident command system, so we too will have operations, planning, logistics, and finance and admin in our organization. So on the next slide, what are responsibilities of EOCs in general, and specifically of the State Emergency Operations Center? First and foremost, what we have to figure out when something major happens is, what is the situation? What are we dealing with? What has occurred? And then we have to make sure that we share that information with all the stakeholders, and we refer to that as a common operating picture. Make sure that we're all on the same page as far as knowing what is going on and how we're going to coordinate our activities. So there are a lot of policies, but also priorities that drive our activities. A very important thing for the state to do is obviously support local jurisdictions with resources. And then the larger an incident gets, the more local and state emergency operations centers will be activated, and then obviously we have to communicate and coordinate with these different operation centers or coordination centers, as they call themselves. So, for example, here in King County, your emergency coordination center is up in Renton. And then last but not least, keeping our elected officials apprised of the situation and how we are responding. And then one final thing to understand with regard to emergency management across all levels of government is the fact that all emergencies and disasters start at the local level, okay? And while they may scale, they ultimately will scale back down and end at the local level. What we need to be aware of, I guess, as citizens is that our law enforcement officers, our fire departments, and our emergency medical services deal with emergencies on a daily basis without any emergency management agency having to be involved in that, and we should truly be thankful. I encourage all of you from time to time, if you encounter during the day a law enforcement officer, a firefighter, or an EMT, to thank them for their service and everything they do to keep us safe on a daily basis. If they run out of resources in responding to a situation, they have mutual aid agreements in place that they can exercise with like services from neighboring jurisdictions. But if the incident exceeds what they can handle by themselves, then typically a city or a county will activate its emergency operations center to support the first responders that are on scene. At the city and county level, the same thing. If more resources are needed, they can reach out in mutual aid to neighboring cities, counties to get mutual aid, or it can be escalated to the state level where we can support the local jurisdictions. We too have mutual aid agreements with other states. We just today received a mutual aid request from the state of Oklahoma because they have huge wildfires that are going on right now in that state. And if we at the state level cannot provide enough support, then we can escalate things to the federal level to get federal support. But regardless, all these EOCs that you have at the local, at the state, at the federal level are ultimately supporting the response that is being conducted by our first responders in the impacted area. So what flows from the bottom up, from the on-scene command to the EOCs, are requests for resources and information about what is going on, and what is pushed in a top-down fashion are resources to help with the response. So that is, in a nutshell, what we are about in the Emergency Management Division.
Thank you. Doug?
Yeah, I'm Doug Weber. I'm the emergency manager for Seattle District Army Corps of Engineers. Just a little bit about the Corps. We're a large organization with a variety of missions, but in a nutshell, we like to build things. We construct infrastructure projects, levees, dams, waterways. We support construction for the military. For example, we build barracks down at JBLM. We have a regulatory program that oversees the nation's waterways, and we have a program where we can provide assistance with disaster response and recovery. A little bit about Seattle District. We operate 3 hydroelectric dams on the east side of the Cascades. And then on the west side, we have the Lake Washington Ship Canal, or the Ballard Locks, and Mud Mountain Dam and Howard Hanson Dam, which they provide flood risk reduction here for King County. The 2 dams here, on the White River and the Green River, provide key flood risk reduction, but I think it's important to remember they don't eliminate the flood risk. And so even with the dams, there is a likelihood of flooding, both on the Green and the White River. When there's a flood event forecasted, the dam operators and water management evaluate, the water that comes into the dam and works to, minimize the flows in those rivers, but, there's always that potential for flooding. Each year, the Corps works with the county and the state, and we work to prepare for the flood seasons. We look at our flood response plans, we conduct training and exercises, and look at vulnerable areas on the levees here in King County. Locally, we have stockpiles of flood fight supplies that we can provide to the county and city. I think, as was stated, that, disasters start local, and as a part of the federal family, we're supplemental, so we can come in and provide supplemental assistance, either with flood fight supplies, engineering assistance, or help with implementing flood fighting if the locals get overwhelmed and need our support. And so we've seen that on a few of the larger floods, on the Green River and the White River, where we've provided sandbags, large super sacks, which is it's a big sandbag, HESCOs, which is basically a temporary sand levee. There's some out now on the City Pacific and out in Sumner. And we have pumps and other flood fight materials we could loan out as well. Just real quickly, other things we do, we help the county with assessing the condition of the levees. We do an annual inspection, provide recommendations on maintenance and operation to improve the reliability of the levees. And then we've been working with King County as well on a system-wide improvement framework for the Green River levees to look at long-term improvements to increase the reliability and the level of protection of the Green River levees. So bottom line is, our mission is to assist the state and the locals with flood fight assistance as they need it. And we have engineers and resources available to help with that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation. Before we get into the phases of our presentation, I'd like to acknowledge some groups here tonight. Specifically, I want to thank the principal of Todd Beamer High School for being here tonight and bringing along some of the great students. Would she stand up and some of the students from Todd Beamer be here? Stand up, please. These students cared enough to come out tonight. Thank you very much. And I also am pleased that one of the smaller but more effective organizations that works so hard when there is an emergency is the Civil Air Patrol, and we're lucky to have the commander and two of the students. Could they please stand up? Thank you all. At this time, I'd also like each of you to take 2 or 3 minutes to talk about one issue at a time. Specifically, each of these organizations have to track the weather, and each of them have to analyze and what impact it's going to have on their particular part of this process. So could each of you, beginning with Michelle Clark, talk about the forecast that you have right now for the spring of 2018 and some of the challenges it could bring to you and the members of the Flood Commission?
Thank you, Councilmember. I think that oftentimes what happens with flooding is that we have a flood season, right? And that is from November through March. Well, I'm here to tell you that it flooded over the weekend, and we're in April. So we need to watch the weather all year round. And this year, one of the things that I'm concerned about is that it was a particularly wet winter, so there was a lot of snow. So we have a larger than normal snowpack this year. The concern for flooding is if it gets too hot too fast, and then the snow starts to melt too fast. What can often happen with the runoff is my friends at the Corps might decide to let some more water onto the rivers in order to do a smaller flood or to create more higher water in the rivers so that we can ensure that there is not a bigger flood later. So for me, flood season never ends. You always have to watch. And another thing that happens often is unfortunately, folks don't just flood from the river. So if there is a large rain event, then you can get stormwater flooding. That's one of the recent deaths in King County, unfortunately, was from a woman had a flash flood in her basement because of stormwater. It wasn't from a river, so, and that was in Seattle, so it can happen. I am always watching the weather to make sure that what the flood control can do, we do to stop those events. One of the things that the flood control does is that I have a flood reduction grant program so that I give grants to cities, to homeowners associations, to nonprofits, to school districts, to help them solve some of these smaller non-riverine flood issues. That program is just started last week, so I would encourage all of you to go to my website, which is kingcountyfloodcontrol.org, and see if any of your organizations can apply for a grant.
Barnaby?
Thank you, Councilmember. At King County Emergency Management, one of the way things have been changing in recent years, largely due to changes in weather patterns that are ascribed to climate change, is the increase in the number, the frequency, and the severity of weather events. So we still plan on what we call an all hazards basis. We look at everything under the book, everything from earthquake to severe weather to ice storms to terrorist attacks. But what the climate scientists tell us is that we should be thinking way more about deeper, more severe droughts in the summertime, less snowpack overall in the wintertime, and the increase in the frequency of severe downpours of rain, what they call the bombogenesis rain dump. We all had one this past weekend, didn't we? The thinking and the preponderance of scientific thinking out there right now is that we should become, for lack of a better word, climatized to this new reality that we're going to be facing. More droughts mean more fires as well. As I was discussing with Chris, last year was the first time in recent memory that we sent out air resources to help assist with suppressing a fire on the west side of the Cascades. First time in quite a long time, if not, I don't know if it's forever, but quite a long time. We all noticed that in emergency management. Certainly the wildland crews that we had to pull back from the east side to help with our firefighting effort on this side are aware of that. So that's just something to think about in the broader and the longer term. The other thing that's being affected by the weather is there's more people moving in here every single day. And many of those people are not aware of the hazards that they're moving, areas that they're moving into. I was in Carnation last week, and they talked about 120 people having moved into that community over the past year or so. And they're not aware of the fact that, many of them are not aware of the fact that they live in a flood zone, or that they live in a dam inundation zone and the threat that exists to that. So we got our work cut out for us, and we'll talk more about how you all can help us get that message out.
Thank you, Councilmember. One of the most important preparedness measures that all of you can take is to be informed about what is going on. And what I'm going to be sharing with you here are just some of the sources that we go to in our agency to find this type of information. So the first slide here basically shows you our snowpack. We have sensors around the state referred to as SNOWTEL. So this is something you can Google on the internet, and then you will get basin by basin in these different watersheds. You will get information about our snowpack currently. So if you look at this, The numbers are basically a comparison to what is normal for an individual basin. And you can see, if you look at the Cascades, that in the northern Cascades, we're a little bit above normal. In the southern Cascades, we're just about at normal. However, over time, the buildup of the snowpack was fairly late in the winter, so fairly recent, if you will. And then one of the things that we're observing here is, for example, in the Okanagan area, we're at 1.5 times the snowpack that we have. And also in the southeast, we're, at 1.3 the normal snowpack. So believe it or not, during the year, we talk to each other. So, we talk to the Corps and say, hey, Doug, are you seeing what I'm seeing? Okay, we have a huge buildup here and are especially concerned right now about the east side of the state. As Michelle already mentioned in the beginning, if we go to the next slide, please, is the snowpack is one thing. That is the stored amount of water that we have in the mountains right now. But for flooding, the question is, how quickly will the runoff happen? And that is depending on the temperature. And the other thing that we want to look at is, are we going to be adding any kind of significant precipitation amounts that may also cause flooding? So what we typically do is, again, we consult NOAA's website, and what they put out there is a climate prediction, if you will, for a 3-month window. So what you're looking at on this slide are likelihoods, probabilities with regard to temperature on the left-hand side and the precipitation on the right-hand side. And all these charts do is basically tell you, is the temperature going to be above average or below, or if it's not colored there where you see the EC, it can be either above or normal or below. So what we're seeing for both temperature and precipitation, that we're not showing any extremes for the next 3 months with regard to either temperature or precipitation. Now, these are just longer-term forecasts. This has nothing to do with an isolated weather event. We may still have a rapid warm-up in a short period of time that may cause a significant amount of melting. But this is something we look at. And finally, on the next slide, and these sources are all publicly available. You can Google all this and find this information yourselves, are the Advanced Hydrological Predictive Services. And what I'm looking at this slide are river gauges within King County. And what you can do on this website is you can look at, again, either right now, today, where these river gauges are at. You can look at where are these river gauges going to be in the next 6 days, or as on this slide, you can again look at a 3-month window. And here, basically on this slide, we are looking at what gauges have a higher than 5% chance that they are going to reach either minor, moderate, or severe flood stage. So, and you're possibly going to have to help me out. So if I'm starting in the north of the county, that would be the Tolt by Carnation, then going down the Snoqualmie near Carnation, the Snoqualmie at Snoqualmie, And the bottom one where you see the text is basically the White River in Auburn. And this data was from a week ago, and it basically says there is just a little bit above 5% chance that you will see moderate flooding in this 3-month window on the White River in Auburn. However, this data changes rapidly. I printed these slides a week ago, and today that has already decreased, that flood likelihood. But my point being, there's a lot of information out there that you can look at and get an idea of what is going on with our water.
Thank you. Doug?
Yeah, our typical Western Washington flood season is November through March, but we have seen some outliers and some pretty significant flooding that has happened in October and, April and May. And some of the large floods, Wynoochee River, I think the flood of record was outside of the established flood season. So we can have these outliers that pretty much it can flood anytime in Western Washington. It's just the probability is increased through that November through March time period. Our Western Washington floods are really driven by intense rain and elevated temperatures. We get that tropical moisture that comes at us from the Pacific, and it rains in the Cascades and comes down in the rivers, and that's really have been our most significant floods. The snowpack, which is healthy this year, it by itself in Western Washington doesn't necessarily cause a flood, but what it can do when it melts, it fills the rivers up, and it takes less rain than to get the rivers up the flood stage. And that's especially true in Eastern Washington as well, like the Okanagan, where they're significantly above normal snowpack. The shape of that runoff, it can fill the river up the flood stage, and then a little bit of rain on top of that can create a pretty substantial flood. And their flood season is really from now all the way through July as that snow melts off. And so I just want to reiterate, even we do have a flood season, it's important to pay attention, but we can have floods outside of that flood season. We've had early October floods and April floods as well.
Thank you. Again, what we're trying to do is understand how they project the problem and how they react to it. I want to make sure that not everybody had a chance to respond to that particular question, but maybe we'll begin with Michelle in terms of the flooding. How do you, as a administrator, react to that, and how do you get the information out to the public so they can respond to this?
Thank you, Councilmember. For me, I think that information prior to the waters coming is always the most important. One of the things that we do is we have a flood brochure that we send out to everybody who lives on the floodplain, so that it has information in here on your emergency kit. I have some on the table out there people can pick up, and it will tell you the numbers to call. But some of the things that I wanted to focus on is that I think people, like it was said earlier, that information is key. And so for me, I always try to make sure that people figure out whether or not they live in a floodplain, whether or not they work in a floodplain, or they drive through a floodplain. I think oftentimes it's easy to say, I live on a hill, it won't affect me, but you got to come off your hill at some point, right? One of the things that concerns me the most is people get in a lot of trouble when they walk or drive through standing water. Just want to give you guys a couple of facts about standing water. It only takes 6 inches of fast, so it's not standing, but 6 inches of fast-moving floodwaters to knock down an adult, right? So I think people think that, oh, it's just a quick puddle, I'll be fine, and then you are in serious trouble. Additionally, it only takes 12 inches of rushing water to carry away a small car, or 2 feet of rushing water to carry away most other vehicles. So at the flood district, we like to say, turn around, don't drown. If there is a large puddle of water in your way, just back up your car and turn around. Another thing that we have at the flood district that is immensely helpful, so we have a flood warning app. You can get it whether it's on, you can get it at the Apple Store, you can get it on your Android phones, and it will give you alerts for whichever one of the 4 river basins you live in or you go through, or that your parents or grandparents or your kids live in, so that you can find out, as soon as I know, that flood up will let you know if we're expected to go to a stage 2, stage 3, or whatever stage on the rivers in the county. I also have a flood warning center where you can call the number. Again, it's in the brochure. You can call the number so that you can find out about sandbagging. You can find out the services that King County provides. We have swift water rescue. That's with the sheriff's office. The past year, I funded half of the new boat for the Marine Division so that they can come out and get you if the water's coming. And we can also go out and inspect the levees to hopefully stop water from coming. But I just wanted to give a brief overview that there are things, I think information's power. And that you guys can, it helps me, I know. I feel safer when I know that I can do something.
Barnaby, do you want to add anything to what you said earlier?
In terms of flooding, I think you covered it very, very well. I also want to let folks know about another alert program called Alert King County. You can Google it. There's stuff material out on the table about that too. And that works for every other kind of emergency that you could possibly. You can opt in, you can put your address in, you can talk about, you can provide information about the condition of yourself or your family, the information that might be helpful to emergency responders. And it's opt-in, it's voluntary, it's secure, and it's incredibly helpful. We've employed it half a dozen times this past year, and it's fairly new, but it seems to be working okay, and not too many folks are complaining. We don't do it in the middle of the night. If you do get a phone call in the middle of the night, it's coming from a much more important source than us. Probably Michelle's shop, because it really is a serious problem, or law enforcement because they've got, an Amber Alert or something like that.
Chris, did you want to add anything?
Just as far as informing the public about the imminent danger, that is, for the most part, in emergency management, a local responsibility. And at the state level, what we primarily do is forward information that we get from the National Weather Service about either weather or specifically flood advisories, watches, warnings. We forward that information to the local jurisdictions to make sure that they do have the information from the National Weather Service. But as far as warning the public directly, we do not do that at the state level as far as flood danger goes. That is happening at the local level.
That's right.
Thank you. Doug?
Yeah, just a little bit about the Corps. We do have a reservoir control center that has water managers that are monitoring the weather and the river conditions full-time. They work closely with the National Weather Service as well and are really paying attention to the flows into the dams and what the outflows are. And similar to the state, we provide that information to the state and the county on what our releases are going to be, but we don't have a public notice. We rely on the county to do that. So we provide the information to the county, and the county does a great job of getting that information out on what the river conditions are going to be downstream of the dams.
I hope the one thing that you're also slowly picking up on is that there is constant communication through all levels of emergency management, all levels of government throughout the year, talking to each other about what are we seeing, what are we currently doing, what kind of impact may that have, without that necessarily being always directly communicated to the public.
Thank you. Doug, you got it all?
Yep.
Okay. This time I'd like to ask each of you, before we throw it open to the audience for some questions, is there anything you want to add from your presentation? You've all been very thorough and I really appreciate it. And, but Michelle, is there anything you want to add before we throw it open to questions from the audience?
I think I'm pretty much good. I have materials out on the front table, so anything, I have more numbers that people can call in case of an emergency.
Yeah, I'd just like to volunteer a couple of simple catchphrases that include the one we're trying to go by, which is make a plan, build a kit, get involved. get involved might be the most important factor of all. That's why and I'm pointing my finger at these wonderful volunteers down here. Your neighbor is your greatest resource. Greatest resource. Water is incredibly important. Food's incredibly important. Shelter's incredibly important. A neighbor, unbeatable. And because it's a multiplier effect on your ability to persevere through a bad situation. And we'll talk more about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I just want to tag on to what Barnaby is sharing with you. Preparedness, there are only 4 steps, okay, that you have to think about. The first one, as I already mentioned, is be informed about what is going on. And regardless of whether we're talking about floods or any other type of hazards, if you have 3 things, the first thing that I recommend that you purchase is a NOAA weather radio, okay, because that will advise you of all kinds of emergency situations, not just weather-related emergencies. The second thing, and I'm putting in a plug here for the Alert King County. A lot of jurisdictions have notification services that you can subscribe to, and they're free, okay? And it helps you stay informed about potential hazards and threats that impact your area. And you basically register with your physical address, email address, phone numbers that will give you safety information during an emergency that pertains to your area where you live. And the third thing, I'm assuming the majority of you have smartphones, and if you purchase these smartphones after 2012, you are automatically also the recipient of wireless emergency alerts, okay? And if you have these 3 things, you're pretty much on top of what is happening around you. The second thing, as Barnaby already mentioned, is yes, make a plan, okay? Write that plan down for your family, what you're going to do, how you're going to communicate with each other. If we're talking about flooding, what is your evacuation route? Where are you going? How are you going to deal with pets or livestock that you may have? Are there people in your family that have any kind of special needs, that need special medication, okay? Then you want to write that plan down. Out on the tables, you have various templates to develop plans like this, a lot of materials. Then the third one is build a kit. And there are a variety of different kinds of kits. First of all, depending on the type of disaster that we're thinking about, if we're thinking about a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, okay, then we are most likely going to have to camp out for a while at home, okay? So do we have everything? We used to say in emergency management, you have to be self-sufficient and ready for 3 days. We're changing that message. Think 2 weeks, okay? Having the necessary supplies. And then think about the fact that you need 1 gallon of water per person per day. You need food supplies, canned meats, canned fruits, vegetables, all kinds of things. That is a home kit. That isn't going anywhere. But then you also want to have grab-and-go kits if you need to leave, okay? And those kits are going to have a different composition if they're for an adult or for a child or for a toddler, okay? And again, out in the exhibit, you have one of the companies that has been involved in putting emergency kits together for the longest, okay? So you can go out there and look at what kits like this should look like. And again, as Barnaby said, is the most important thing is for you all to become involved, for the young people to become preparedness ambassadors, okay, and go out and a plug I would have, and I'm inviting you to look this up on the internet. There's a program that we have supported. It's been in place for over 20 years. It's called Map Your Neighborhood, and just builds on the fact that in a disaster, your most immediate source of help are going to be the neighbors that live around you, okay? So this program is basically designed to improve disaster readiness at the neighborhood level. There is a great variety of materials, booklets, CDs, everything available for this program, and it just takes somebody in the neighborhood to start inviting neighbors and go through a 90-minute meeting with all the materials to get you started. Map your neighborhood, become involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug?
Yeah, my colleagues have provided some really good information. I think I'll just add and reiterate, know the hazards associated with where you work and live, especially for floods. There's some really good information out on the King County website about where the floodplains are and the floodways, what river levels will flood what areas. And it's just really good to know if your home or where you work or where you plan on driving is going to be affected by those floods. And know that ahead of time, and that'll, then when there are flood forecasts available, you can use those and put those into context of whether they will affect you or not. And I think that's really important, that I think there's a lot of people in the valley that don't understand where it floods, and it's really good ahead of time to know, what your risks are for flooding and for other hazards as well.
Great, thank you very much. This time I want to invite some of the participants from the outside who have displays here to maybe share a couple minutes of what their program is. And Jeff, why don't you share a little bit, then we're going to also have Harborview talk about what they have available as well. So Jeff, why don't you go ahead and lead off and use that microphone there. And then Fran, if you can, talk about Harborview.
I'm Jeff Getty. I'm a service disabled vet. I served from 1965 to 1969. I'm the president of American Preparedness. Our veterans are proud to have been the organization that introduced emergency kits to the National Red Cross in 1989. And we subsequently, 15 years later, got the only national contract they've ever given out. It was $38 million, so that's not bad for a King County business. But we're also a social entrepreneur. Most of our profits go back into helping the community. We have a Kits for Kids program where we provide the one-person 3-day grab-and-go kit that this gentleman was talking about. This kit was sold by the Red Cross for 20 years and has been well vetted. We also have a host of other emergency preparedness kits, CERT kits, and other kits that go out to many organizations. We make custom kits for water departments, for other organizations, so their first responders can stay on the job and not have to worry about their families at home. When I grew up, many of you probably are old enough to remember, we had civil defense shelters. It was a real winner in a lot of ways. Surplus agriculture department, food and water would go into the shelter. They were all over town. You could tell by the symbol that was up there, orange and black symbol. That isn't the case today. Today, at the street level, as far as I know, after 38 years, there's nothing out there. If you don't have yourself taken care of at home, a 15 or 30-day kit at home, and a 3-day minimum in your vehicle, you're out of luck. And I worked as a Red Cross volunteer for 20 years, and I can tell you, turning out to one earthquake in California, you see people with $100,000 Mercedes and not even a bottle of water in it, and they live in earthquake country. You can't knock on a person's window the second day of a disaster and say, hey, gimme, it isn't going to happen. If you don't have it, you're not going to get it. We'd also like to let you know that we do support our Kits for Kids. We donate kits to low-income military families, low-income seniors on the Meals on Wheels, and we also donate to the Chicken Soup Brigade. I think we donated about 7,000 or 8,000 kits in the last 3-4 years, mostly within King County. There's two headlines here. One is, this is one of our sister cities in Japan. Major earthquake, thousands perished. And this is a headline for today. How ready are you? Are you going to be self-sufficient? Are you going to think you're cool and wait till something happens and yell for the government to come help you? Lots of luck. They've got a full-time job just handling the disasters and responding to critical emergencies. They're not going to have time to be out there for everybody that was not smart enough to be prepared. So if we've done anything here today, and these folks have given you a fine background, get yourself prepared, be an asset to the community, don't be a liability. And support veterans in business. We get a lot of lip service, but we get very little support. Before I retire after 38 years, my goal is to make one sale to King County. I've made them to other counties, but by God, I'm going to make one here. We want our local organizations and cities and counties to support us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Fran Kwok, and I am with Harborview Medical Center. And a little bit about Harborview. Harborview is the Level 1 Adult and Pediatric Trauma Center serving Washington, Alaska, Montana, and Idaho. And we are owned by King County and managed by the University of Washington. So we're part of the UW Medicine care system. And as the Level 1 Trauma Center, we also promote injury prevention. So Harborview leads a coalition of nonprofits and agencies called Safe Kids Seattle South King. And we go out into the community and promote injury prevention and talk to families about keeping their children safe. So today out in the lobby, I have a little bit of information about Harborview. I have some injury prevention information. We talk about window falls and bike safety and poisonings, drownings, all sorts of information. So I have some window locks out there and various other information if any parents. We also do complimentary car seat inspections. We partner with King County EMS and do monthly car seat inspections for parents during the summer months so they can have their car seats installed and fitted correctly. So stop by my table.
Thank you very much. And lastly, I didn't know if the commander of the Civil Air Patrol wanted to share a little bit about what he and his troops do in the case of emergency, if they want to use the microphone. And then we'll throw it open to questions. If you have a question of the panelists or a comment you want to share, this would be a great opportunity to do it. I also want to thank King County Television. This is being televised and it will be broadcast on King County Network, and I appreciate all those involved in that process as well. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So I'm the commander of the local squadron. We are the Green River Composite Squadron. We are one of 31 squadrons in the state, and we typically bring in cadets to train them in emergency services and other aspects of taking them through to leadership programs and that kind of thing. We are an auxiliary to the Air Force, and we are here to support search and rescue through aerial methods. We use our Cessna 182s to go forward and help seek people out, downed aircraft, as well as anyway, so primarily we go and do the photography. We do digital photography, like when the Oso landslide took place, we had aircraft out there doing digital photography. So that's a little bit of what we do throughout the year as we prepare for whatever happens to us. So
How many individuals do you have in your Green River Squadron?
in our squadron, we have 48 people.
Outstanding.
And half of them are cadets and half of them are seniors.
Excellent.
I'm just interested, what airport do you utilize?
We utilize the Auburn Airport here directly. We also have aircraft in Renton, Boeing Field. We have 14 aircraft across the state that are dispersed throughout.
Where are your headquarters?
Where's our headquarters? We're out of JBL, well, headquarters of the Civil Air Patrol is in Alabama, Maxwell Air Force Base. But our local wing headquarters is in JBLM.
Thank you very much. We'll take, you guys can meet afterwards if you will.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now's an opportunity, if you have a question that relates to emergency preparedness or have an issue that you want to bring to the attention, this is a good opportunity to come up here and use the microphone if you wouldn't mind. So yes, sir, be first. Does anybody else want to join us? Ma'am, why don't you go ahead, ma'am, right now while he's coming down. Okay. Can you identify yourself again with Black Diamond?
Erin Stout, Black Diamond City Council. When an emergency happens, we always hope that it doesn't happen to us. And usually it doesn't. You know, we're kind of spread out. But what I'm wondering is there a clearinghouse for volunteers? Because, you know, we see something on the news, we know that people are in trouble, and I think often people want to jump in and help, but we don't really know how to do that.
I'll take that one. Thanks for the question. There are several ways to get involved as a volunteer. Everything from the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts to your local church, on up to CERTs or community emergency response teams. We've got a couple of folks in the audience tonight that are engaged in some really active CERT teams. Wesley Holmes Lee Hill being one of them. And you can go on King County Emergency Management. You can Google that and click on the section about volunteering, and we'll get you a connection and some contacts for people to talk to.
Great.
CERTs are really vibrant right now, and I urge everyone to take advantage of that. But Civil Air Patrol is, you know, another important volunteer group, and the list goes on and on.
Excellent. Anybody else want to add anything to that? Yes, sir.
Just one thing that I would highly recommend, please think about your volunteer engagement ahead of time and affiliate yourself with a volunteer organization so that ahead of time you get the necessary training, the equipment, and know what to do. Although a lot of people spontaneously want to help the day of, managing spontaneous volunteers that are not affiliated with any organization can become a management challenge. So I encourage everybody to seek out a volunteer organization of your liking and get engaged in preparedness with that organization.
Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, hi. This is a clarification in regards to Chris's presentation. I didn't quite understand how your reporting chain leads, say, to the guard or the governor, and also what may be your cooperation areas with state police or other state agencies?
So when we activate the State Emergency Operations Center, then at a partial activation or a full activation, depending on the needs of the impacted area, we identify so-called emergency support functions that are needed. So these are categories like transportation, communication, public works, medical assistance, search and rescue. And for each of these emergency support functions, we have state agencies assigned to them. So we will basically look at the nature and the complexity of an incident, make a determination which emergency support functions are needed by the local jurisdictions, and then activate the respective state agencies that fill those emergency support functions. We report through our director, who is the Adjutant General of the National Guard, to the governor. We are responsible ultimately to the governor of our state.
Any additional questions from the audience? Yes, sir, come on over here. And make sure everybody knows what school you're from.
Hi, my name is Jonathan, and I go to Todd Beamer High School. My question is for Mr. Utzinger. Earlier, you stated that there was a computer program or an automated program that could tell how high a river was going to be and what percentage. You said 5% chance that the White River or the Green River was going to exceed its limit, and that lets us know, people who live there, what we have to prepare for. My question is because, as I saw on the board, there was it was in 3 months. So my guess is, does that undermine the credibility of this computer system because it's a long period of time? Like, because I know we can't see into the future. I mean, you can see trends, I can see that, but doesn't it undermine? Because you yourself also stated later that, quote, the numbers fluctuate. So how can I, as a patron or a civilian, really trust this system is what I'm asking.
You want to take that on, Chris?
Absolutely. Great question. So as we look at these tools, obviously the most accurate is going to be a current reading on a river right now, okay? Then we can forecast, for example, for the next few days, and that is going to be fairly accurate. And then the farther out you forecast, the more inaccurate it gets, okay? So if we're talking about a 3-month window, obviously, then we have to be aware that these are computer models that are run, and with the extended time, it becomes less accurate, but it gives you an idea of where you're headed.
Thank you.
I would like to add that if you want a shorter snapshot in time, you should get my flood warning app again. It will.
That is very, very good statement that Michelle is making there, is that you have federal, state, and local information sources, okay? And the closer the information source is to you, the more likely that you're getting accurate information and pertinent information for your area. So my advice is always first seek out the local information sources that you have available to you.
Thank you. All right, anybody else have a question? Yes, ma'am, in the very back. Can you speak up a little loud?
My name's Linda Banks, and I'm an Auburn resident. I'd like to say that I am thrilled to see that this is happening. I came up from California, and I don't know, maybe I still have the only emergency preparedness kit. I thought probably in the state of Washington, everybody laughed at me because I had my earthquake kit. And I've had it for 25 years. I'd like to see, do you have anything for informing businesses? Because if something happens, you know, we see it in the movies. You're not always at home. You're not always able to get at home. Sometimes you're all stuck at work. Do you have a program for businesses to get themselves at least some minimum plan?
Anybody want to respond to that?
Sure. The short answer is yes, and the King County Emergency Management, we have a public outreach sector, the same people who developed these materials in concert with our friends here. We have a program that's directed right at businesses and other large institutions, helping them out with ways for organizing their facilities and their organizations. So they have things like floor wardens and regular drills and things like that. So the short answer is yes, there is a program. We also recently formulated a thing that we call a Business Emergency Operations Center, which operates within our Government Emergency Operations Center, and it has folks in it like the Small Business Association, Chambers of Commerce, Amazon, Microsoft, and others who send a representative either virtually or in person to our facility, and they set up sort of a node within our greater, our larger operation when a bad thing happens. So there's a lot of work being done on that front, but boy, we could use a lot more, that's for sure.
Thank you very much. I also want to recognize that there are some first responders in the audience, and I know we acknowledged our deputy sheriff here, but I also like to, if you're a first responder, could you please stand up and take a round of applause? And I'm talking, there we go, first responders. I also want to know if there are any retired military in the audience. Please raise your hand or stand up. Retired military. Mr. Pelosa, did you serve in the military? U.S. Navy. You never retired? Anybody who served in the military, please stand up and give them a round of applause. And I really want to recognize the fact that everybody in this panel has a day job, and they came out tonight because they care enough about this issue. And we all appreciate the fact that each of you showed up. But let's give them a round of applause, because and I want to try to get us out of here in the next 3 minutes. Does anybody have any last-minute comment that they want to share with the audience? Besides, Michelle's going to say goodbye, because Michelle is our right hand and left hand when it comes to this issue, and we really appreciate the fact that she has taken on this challenge. And there is not a part of King County that Michelle Clark has not visited in her new role. And I mean from Algona to Seattle to Bellevue to Carnation, and she has taken on this challenge and has really reinvigorated King County's commitment to dealing with this issue. And if you're down in the Pacific area and Algona area, you know how important King County's flood district has been to protecting that area. So I want to thank Michelle in particular, with all due respect to the gentleman. A round of applause for Michelle. And this is a good time to thank everyone for being here. And if you have any questions, we have some really nice people in the back who might be able to help you. And if you have questions you want to ask of the panel, please come forward now. And I want to thank everyone for being here. Good night.